stop for a moment before you take another step. Before exhaustion convinces you to walk away from someone you still care about, there is something you need to hear. Guy, you thought the sigh you released earlier went unnoticed, but it did not. Every moment of frustration, every silent question, and every burden you have been carrying has been seen. Guy, and the message here is not asking you to relive the past. It is asking you to reconsider what you believe is happening right now, because what looks like an ending may not be the end of the story. Guy, do not give up on that person yet. Not today. That sentence may be difficult to hear, because you know exactly what this relationship has cost you. You remember the long silences, the painful words. Guy, the moments when you gave everything you had and seemed to receive almost nothing in return. You have replayed conversations in your mind, searching for some small indication that all of this meant something. Guy, but according to the message you are hearing, none of that time has been wasted. The person occupying your thoughts right now is presented as someone who did not enter your life by accident. Guy, the message argues that people can arrive in our lives for reasons we may not immediately understand, including those who stay, those who leave, Guy, and especially those who challenge our patience and expose the deepest parts of our hearts. What you currently see as a chapter of disappointment may, from a larger perspective, Guy, be a chapter that comes immediately before a major change. You may look at this person and see their distance, their silence, their flaws, and their inability to meet you where you are. Because of that, Guy, you may have concluded that you are pouring your energy into ground that will never produce anything. But the message asks you to consider another possibility. Perhaps the ground is not barren. Guy, perhaps it simply has not reached its season yet. The love, patience, tears and effort you have invested are compared to seeds working beneath the surface, unseen but not necessarily lifeless. Guy, it also suggests that you were placed in this person's life because you carry something they have struggled to receive from others. That does not mean you are perfect or that your own wounds do not matter. Instead, Guy, the message describes your presence as carrying a particular kind of grace and love capable of reaching parts of this person that have remained guarded. Guy, where others may have seen someone who was too difficult to understand or too difficult to help, the message says there was still a person beneath those defenses who could become something different. Guy, but this relationship has not only been about changing the other person, it has also been a mirror for you. Through the difficult moments, you have been forced to confront fears. Guy, recognize wounds that still needed healing, and discover strengths you may never have known were there. Guy, circumstances that felt unnecessarily painful may have developed qualities inside you that easier circumstances could never have produced. You are not the same person you were when this began. Guy, you have developed greater patience, greater depth, and a stronger understanding of the kind of love you are capable of carrying. And now the message turns toward the person you have been tempted to leave behind. Guy, suggesting that their resistance may not mean your love has been insufficient. Instead, it presents their walls as evidence that something about your presence has challenged them. Their silence, distance, Guy, and guarded behavior are described not simply as proof that you mean nothing, but as possible signs that they are confronting parts of themselves they would rather avoid. Guy, people often protect themselves from things that threaten to change them, and this message suggests that your presence has been creating that kind of confrontation. Guy, it describes quiet moments when this person is left alone with their thoughts, when distractions disappear and they are forced to face what they actually feel. In those moments, the message suggests, Guy, they are beginning to recognize what life might look like without you. They may not be ready to express that realization openly, but something is supposedly shifting beneath the surface. Guy, That shift may not arrive through some dramatic announcement. Instead, it may appear through small changes that are easy to overlook. A softer tone, an unexpected moment of vulnerability, a message that arrives when you least expect it, or a simple gesture that carries more meaning than its size suggests. The message asks you not to dismiss those small movements simply because they are not dramatic. Transformation, it says, often begins quietly. The first light of dawn does not immediately fill the entire sky, and in the same way, the earliest signs of change may be almost invisible. What matters is learning to recognize movement before the final outcome becomes obvious. The message then asks for one tangible act of trust. It compares faith to a farmer placing seed into the soil before there is any visible evidence of a harvest. The farmer does not wait until everything is guaranteed before planting. In the same way, you are being asked to release what you are holding and trust the process rather than demanding complete proof first. This leads directly into the question of the sign you have been asking for. Perhaps you have quietly asked for something unmistakable, something that would tell you whether you should continue. You may have asked during prayer, during lonely moments, or in the silence of your own thoughts. And the message gives an unexpected answer. The sign you were waiting for may already be present in this very moment. It suggests that the fact you encountered these words, that something inside you recognized them, and that this particular person's name came into your mind while listening are meaningful. The message does not describe the sign as something that must arrive later. It presents this moment itself as the answer and asks whether you are willing to receive it. But there is another important distinction. You may have wanted a sign so undeniable that it would remove every trace of uncertainty. Yet the message argues that something requiring absolutely no faith would be a demonstration rather than a sign. Faith exists precisely where the outcome is not yet visible, where you must participate rather than simply watch. You have spent a long time living between what you hope will happen and what you can currently see. That space has been painful, but the message insists that it has not been meaningless. Your patience, your prayers, your willingness to continue loving despite uncertainty, and your decision not to give up have all shaped you in ways you may only fully understand later. And now, according to this message, the frozen places are beginning to thaw. Situations that once seemed permanently stuck may start shifting through small but noticeable changes. Conversations may become easier. Tension may soften. Doors that appeared completely closed may begin to move. These changes may seem insignificant at first, but the message asks you to pay attention, because major changes often begin with movements that barely seem worth mentioning. The same idea applies to the anxiety you have been carrying. The constant worry, the questions that kept you awake, and the fear of making the wrong decision may begin to loosen their grip. The circumstances may not have changed yet, but the message says something inside you can change before anything outside you does. That change is described as peace. Not the peace that comes from having every problem solved, but the kind that can exist while the situation is still unresolved. It is a peace that does not depend entirely on circumstances. And for someone who has spent so long searching for certainty, that may be the first real sign that something within the story has already begun to change. But the message goes deeper than simply telling you to wait for a relationship to change. It asks you to understand what this connection is actually producing in your life, because you have been measuring it mainly by what it has cost you. The better question, it says, is not only how much this relationship has taken from you, but what it has been building inside you while you were living through it. What is being formed through this season is described as something larger than the restoration of two people. It is presented as a testimony, a living example of what can happen when love, patience, And faith continue through circumstances that would normally cause people to walk away. The message suggests that a watching world needs to see that patience is not weakness, and that two wounded people can sometimes be brought into something neither could have created alone. The impact, according to the message, may extend beyond the two people involved. It could reach people you have never met, conversations that have not happened yet, and even future generations who may one day look at what was built and learn something about love from it. This is why the season is described as an assignment rather than simply a difficult relationship. You did not enter it because it would be easy. You entered it because you were believed to have the strength to carry it. That does not mean you carried it perfectly. There were moments when you stumbled, questioned everything, and wondered whether continuing was even reasonable, but the message emphasizes that you kept returning. Day after day, through uncertainty, you continued choosing to remain, and that repeated decision became part of the foundation for whatever comes next. Even your tears are given meaning, They are compared to seeds planted in the ground, moments that seemed to disappear but were not necessarily wasted. The harvest, the message says, does not always announce itself beforehand. Sometimes it simply becomes visible one day, and when that happens, you finally understand why the difficult season required so much from you. Then the focus turns away from the relationship and toward you. Beneath all the questions about the other person, you have also been asking whether you are enough. Is your love enough? Has your patience been enough? Do you really have what it takes to continue through something this difficult? The answer given here is direct. You are enough, not because you have performed perfectly, but because you were given what you needed for the season you are in. The message describes the version of you that has emerged from this experience as stronger than the person who entered it. What felt like erosion was actually formation. What felt like something being taken away may have been the removal of things that were never meant to remain, creating room for something more lasting. That is why the difficulty should not automatically be interpreted as failure. The message argues that hardship can sometimes be evidence that something is being formed rather than destroyed. You have been established through what you have survived, and the person you have become may now be capable of carrying things that the earlier version of you could not have carried. And what comes next is described as different from what came before. The message does not portray the coming season as another repetition of the same exhaustion. Instead, it describes an atmosphere beginning to change, resistance beginning to lift, and situations that once required enormous effort becoming more natural. The relationship that has caused some of your greatest weariness is presented as capable of eventually becoming one of your greatest sources of strength. Conversations may begin to feel different. Interactions may carry less tension. The distance that once seemed permanent may gradually give way to a connection that feels more open and genuine. The message then asks you to remember 3 things as you move forward. First, you were never alone during the difficult parts, not during the hard conversations, the sleepless nights, or the moments when leaving seemed easier than staying. Second, none of what you gave was wasted. Every act of love, every prayer, every tear, and every attempt to extend grace is presented as something that still has meaning. And third, the sign you have been asking for is presented as real and already present. This moment is described as intentional rather than random, and you are encouraged to let that belief become more than temporary comfort. Instead, it should become a foundation you can return to when the same doubts come back. You arrived carrying a question, but you are being asked to leave carrying something different. Not every detail has been resolved. And not every outcome is visible, but the message says the most important things are already in place. You are seen, you are heard, you are not alone, and what you are doing matters. Then comes a deeper question, Guy, one that may have been underneath all the others. You may have wondered whether God is actually real, whether any of this is true, Guy, or whether your faith has simply been something you needed in order to survive a difficult season. The message does not condemn that question. Instead, it treats the doubt as an honest expression of something happening deep within you. It points to the moments you cannot completely explain. The unexpected peace, the feeling of being held during dark periods, and the strange sequence of events that seem to align at precisely the right time. These experiences are presented as personal evidence, something you may have been hesitant to acknowledge because the world around you has taught you to be cautious about what cannot easily be proven. But now the message turns toward another source of confusion. Silence. There have been periods when your prayers seemed to disappear into an empty room, when heaven felt distant and every attempt to reach for an answer seemed to return without one. The message insists that silence should not automatically be interpreted as absence. Instead, it compares those silent periods to the work of a craftsman who becomes quiet when the work reaches its most delicate stage. The silence is described not as distance, but as intense activity taking place beneath the surface. What you could not see was not necessarily nothing. It was work happening in places your senses could not detect. The same explanation is applied to the person you have been waiting for. Their lack of visible change does not necessarily mean nothing is happening internally. The message describes changes taking place within the hidden parts of their character and emotions, changes they may not yet understand or know how to express. That is why you are being asked to trust the process even when you cannot see it. The comparison is again made to a seed beneath the soil. From the outside, nothing appears to be happening, while underneath the surface, everything necessary for growth may already be taking place. And this is where the message introduces an important distinction about trust. It is not asking for blind trust that ignores reality. It describes something closer to informed trust, the decision to remain aligned with what you believe even when circumstances have not yet confirmed it. You have been living between a promise and its visible fulfillment, and that space has tested you. But the message says that this gap is precisely where faith is formed, where character grows, and where you learn to depend on something beyond your own understanding. The message acknowledges that the gap has lasted a long time. It does not deny the exhaustion or pretend that waiting has been easy, but it insists that the gap has an edge, that what has felt endless is not necessarily permanent, and that the turning point may be closer than your weariness allows you to believe. Life moves through seasons, and the message uses that idea to describe your current situation. Winter does not last forever. The ground can begin warming beneath the surface before anyone can see the first signs of spring, and in the same way, something may already be changing beneath the circumstances you are facing. So the instruction becomes remarkably simple. Stay. Not through denial, not by pretending everything is fine, and not by forcing yourself to feel certain. Stay honestly, acknowledging that this is difficult while still choosing to trust. Because real faith, according to the message, is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to experience fear and still choose trust alongside it. Your struggle does not make you abandoned or forgotten. In fact, the message says the places where you feel weakest may be the very places where you are being held most carefully. The message now turns toward the days ahead, moving from general encouragement to more specific expectations. It says that conversations that once seemed impossible will gradually become possible, not instantly and not without effort, but through a noticeable change in the quality of the connection between you and this person. There may be a conversation that catches you off guard, Guy. Opening something that has remained closed for a long time and communicating more through what is finally possible than through the words themselves. When that moment comes, the message says, Guy, something inside you will recognize it. You will understand that this is not simply another conversation, but an early movement toward the change you have been waiting for. Guy. And the dreams you nearly stopped allowing yourself to hold are not necessarily gone either. You became careful with hope because you learned that the more you hoped, the more painful disappointment could become. Guy. But now you are being asked to let yourself hope again. Not recklessly and not by pretending that everything is already resolved, but honestly. Guy. The message argues that when hope becomes deliberately small, simply to protect you from pain, it can no longer fully function as faith. You are being asked to hold on to the possibility of what this relationship can become, and allow that vision to carry you through the days when the visible circumstances have not yet caught up with the promise. Guy. The message makes a strong statement about the future. You will not regret staying. One day, when you are looking back at the moment you almost walked away but chose to remain, Guy, you will understand the difficulty differently. The timing will make more sense, the painful parts will become clearer, and the unusual way everything unfolded will no longer seem as confusing as it does now. That future perspective is presented as something that will bring a deep kind of gratitude, the kind that can only come from surviving something real. The message insists that the story is not over, and that what feels like an ending may actually be the point where the story begins to change. It then expands the promise beyond the relationship itself and speaks about the household. The message says that peace is coming, not simply the absence of arguments or tension, but a deeper sense of warmth and stability. The guarded atmosphere that has become familiar is expected to soften, and the walls that have kept people emotionally separated are described as eventually coming down. At first, that change may happen slowly, but eventually the message says it can become surprisingly complete, creating space for something new to be built. Something that neither person could have created alone may emerge in that newly opened space, carrying the unmistakable impression of divine involvement. This is described as the way God works. Rebuilding what appears to be ruined, restoring what others have already decided cannot be restored, and creating a path where there previously seemed to be none. The message applies that idea directly to the details of this particular situation, including what is happening between you and the person you have been waiting for, and the hidden inner lives of both of you. But beneath your exhaustion and your uncertainty about whether to stay, there is another emotion that needs to be confronted: fear. You are afraid that remaining will only lead to more of the same pain. You fear giving even more of yourself only to receive another period of silence, coldness, or disappointment. And you worry that choosing the harder path may simply lead to the same dead end. The message does not dismiss that fear. In fact, it acknowledges that your fear is understandable, because it has been shaped by what you have already experienced. You have history behind your concern, and there is nothing irrational about being cautious after repeatedly being hurt. But it argues that fear is working with an incomplete picture. Fear takes the information provided by the past and projects it directly into the future, assuming that because something happened repeatedly before, it must continue happening in exactly the same way. The message challenges that assumption by saying that the pattern is not permanent, and that the very pattern you fear is the one being changed. Fear tends to operate through prediction. It takes yesterday's evidence and draws a straight line toward tomorrow. But the message says that divine action does not always follow the straight line human reasoning expects. It can create possibilities that previous circumstances could never have predicted. That is why the message describes God as the one who can bring unexpected reversals and create a way when every visible path appears blocked. Your fear is real. Your past is real. But the possibility of something genuinely new emerging within those realities is also presented as real. The question then is not whether fear will disappear completely. Instead, the question is whether you can allow fear to exist while still choosing trust. That is described as the deeper meaning of faith, not pretending that you are never afraid, but refusing to let fear make every decision for you. The message then addresses another part of this experience that may be harder to explain: loneliness. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from carrying a situation so personal and complicated that even people close to you may not fully understand it. From the outside, others may interpret your decision to remain as stubbornness or an inability to move forward, while internally you may experience it as something very different. The message says you are not necessarily stubborn. It calls you faithful. Stubbornness, it explains, refuses to change, while faithfulness continues holding on to what it believes is right even when outside pressure demands that it be released. According to this message, what you have been doing belongs to the second category. That loneliness, however, is not presented as permanent. Understanding and community are expected to come into your life, including people who have experienced something similar and can understand what you have been carrying without requiring you to explain every detail. The season of carrying everything alone is described as coming to an end. What follows is presented as a season of shared strength. You may eventually find people who can understand your story, stand beside you, and help you turn what you learned through this difficult experience into something that can benefit others. Then the message returns to the person at the center of your questions. Beneath all the larger questions about whether you should continue, there is one very personal question you may have been afraid to ask directly. Does this person actually love me? Have they truly seen me? Do I mean something real to them, or have I simply become someone they are accustomed to having around? The answer given by the message is direct. It says that this person does see you, even if they have not yet learned how to express what they see. Their perception of you and their ability to communicate that perception are described as two different things, with a gap between them that is supposedly where the deeper work is taking place. The message describes that gap as a bridge being built. The person's feelings may exist beneath defenses created by fear, history, and emotional wounds, while their ability to express those feelings remains restricted. But as those internal barriers begin to change, the message says their ability to communicate what they feel will also begin to emerge. It may not happen perfectly or immediately. Instead, the expression is expected to become clearer gradually, first through small actions and later through larger ones. You may begin to recognize that you were never as invisible to this person as their silence made you feel. The message suggests that you have remained in their thoughts even during the moments when they seemed to turn away. Their distance, it says, was not necessarily proof that you meant nothing. It may have reflected the opposite, that you meant more than they knew how to handle. So you are asked to hold on to that possibility during the difficult days. The message presents it not as wishful thinking, but as what is supposedly visible from a perspective that can see beyond the defenses and silence. It says that you are known, valued, and deeply appreciated beneath the surface, even if the person has not yet found the words to express it, and the central instruction remains the same: stay. Stay because you are being asked to remain, because the change you are waiting for is presented as real, and because the version of this story that may unfold could be far more beautiful than the ending your exhaustion has already imagined. Whatever comes next, the message says, you are not walking into it alone. As you move into what comes next, carry one truth with you. You are not walking into the future alone. Sky. The message describes God as the one who designed the future, holds it, and remains actively involved in what is good for you. What you have experienced is not presented as the final chapter, Sky, but as a turning point. A place in the story where you may eventually look back and recognize that this was when things began to change. Sky. That is why you are being asked to remember that every promise spoken over your life is still being held. None of them has expired or been withdrawn. When difficult days return and doubt becomes louder than faith, Sky, you are encouraged to return to what was spoken here, not simply as a comforting memory, but as something that can guide you through whatever comes next. The message then goes deeper into the nature of faithful love and what it believes happens beyond what human eyes can see. When you continue loving someone who has not yet learned how to receive that love, Sky, you are not simply being patient with one individual. You are choosing a different way of responding in a world that often teaches people to leave whenever relationships become difficult. According to the message, Sky, the world can make people believe that love should always be easy and that personal comfort should come first. But every time you chose grace instead of retaliation, patience instead of immediate departure, Sky, and love instead of protecting yourself at every cost, you were demonstrating something different. That demonstration does not need an audience. It happens in ordinary moments, in private decisions, Sky, and during days when nobody else knows what you are carrying, Sky. The message says those choices still have significance because they demonstrate that love can remain stronger than disappointment and that commitment can survive circumstances that might otherwise destroy it. But there is also another area the message wants you to consider, your practical life. It says that God is not concerned only with spiritual questions while ignoring the everyday pressures that surround you. Sky. The emotional weight of this season may have been accompanied by financial concerns, household pressures, responsibilities, and other practical difficulties that cannot simply be solved by positive thinking. Sky. The message says those needs are seen as well. It describes doors beginning to open, not merely as symbolic opportunities, but as practical possibilities. Resources that once seemed inaccessible may become reachable, and people who have something you need may cross your path at the right time. This is presented as provision connected to faithfulness. Sky. The message describes God as one who can make a way where there seemed to be no way, open what had been closed, multiply what appeared insufficient, and bring what was missing into supply. Sky. You are encouraged to remain alert to these opportunities rather than automatically dismissing them, because previous disappointments have taught you to expect less. The message then becomes even more specific, Sky, saying that this coming season may bring visible and practical changes into your household and into the areas of life that have felt most strained. It mentions the possibility of provision affecting everyday circumstances as well as deeper concerns, and asks you to receive what comes without immediately assuming that it cannot possibly be for you. The central idea is that a person who has experienced disappointment can sometimes become suspicious even when something good finally arrives. You may instinctively question it, minimize it, or expect it to disappear. But the message encourages you not to reject good things simply because you have become accustomed to disappointment. Then the focus returns to the relationship between you and God. The message says that God has never been distant, even during the periods when the silence felt like distance. Those quiet periods are again described as the silence of a father who is close and deeply involved. Much like a craftsman becoming quiet while working on something delicate, the message insists that the hardest moments were not necessarily moments of absence. They may have been moments when presence was deeper than you could recognize. What looked like silence from your perspective is described as quiet work taking place beneath the surface. Because of that, Guy, you are encouraged to change the way you approach your relationship with God going forward. Do not come only during emergencies or when everything feels like it is collapsing. Instead, Guy, bring God into ordinary moments, the quiet parts of your day, the small decisions, your plans, your conversations, and even the unremarkable routines that normally pass without much thought. Guy, the kind of closeness being described is not supposed to depend entirely on crisis. It is presented as something continuous. Guy, woven through everyday life rather than appearing only when circumstances become unbearable. The message describes this as the relationship you were designed for. Not distance followed by emergency contact, Guy, but an ongoing sense of connection. And then comes a final reassurance about what lies ahead. You are told that you are going to be more than merely fine. The message describes what is coming as genuinely good, Guy, something that has been prepared and held for the right season and is now beginning to emerge. You are encouraged to receive it because you were made capable of carrying what comes next, Guy. The message returns to its central assurance. You are seen, you are held, and what began in your life is not finished. The difficult season has not erased the purpose behind your story, Guy. Before reaching the final conclusion, however, the message returns once more to the deeper meaning of your perseverance, Guy. The love you have continued to show is presented as something that has significance beyond the immediate relationship, Guy. Every private decision to keep showing grace is described as part of a larger demonstration of what faithful love can look like when circumstances make it difficult. Guy, the message does not claim that the path has been painless. In fact, pain is part of the story. You have had moments when staying seemed unreasonable, moments when the silence felt unbearable, Guy, and moments when you wondered whether continuing to hope was only making the eventual disappointment harder. Yet the message argues that these experiences have not disqualified you, Guy. They have become part of what shaped you. Your patience was developed through waiting, your compassion through difficulty, and your faith through circumstances where certainty was unavailable. This is why the message continues to distinguish between blind optimism and trust. It is not asking you to pretend that every problem has already disappeared. Instead, Guy, it asks you to move forward while acknowledging what has been difficult and still choosing to believe that the future does not have to repeat the past. That distinction becomes especially important when thinking about the person at the center of this story. Their current behavior does not necessarily reveal the entire story of what they may feel internally. The message maintains that there can be a difference between what someone experiences inside and what they are capable of expressing outwardly. That gap is where the message says change is taking place. The person may still have defenses, fears, and unresolved history, but those things are not necessarily permanent. The possibility remains that what has been hidden can eventually become visible through words, actions, and choices. And this brings the story back to the same central point that has appeared throughout the message. Do not confuse the absence of visible results with the absence of movement. A seed beneath the soil looks unchanged until the moment its growth becomes visible. Likewise, something can be developing long before anyone outside the situation recognizes it. You have already been changed by this season, whether or not the relationship has changed as quickly as you wanted. The person you are now has greater patience, deeper compassion, and a stronger understanding of what it means to remain committed through uncertainty. Whatever happens next, those changes are already part of your story. The message asks you to carry that strength forward without allowing fear to erase what you have learned. The future is not guaranteed simply because you have endured the past. Guy. But you are being encouraged to believe that the difficulty you experienced does not have to define everything that follows. And as this section comes to a close, Guy, the message returns to its most intimate reassurance. God is described not as a distant presence, waiting for you to become perfect, but as a father who has remained close through every stage of the journey. Guy. The invitation is to stop seeing the quiet moments as evidence of abandonment and begin seeing them as opportunities for deeper, everyday closeness. The difficult season may have taught you how to survive uncertainty, but the season ahead is described as one in which you can begin to experience something different. Peace, provision, connection, and a renewed sense of trust. The message asks you to step into that possibility without carrying the assumption that tomorrow must look exactly like yesterday. There is one final truth you are being asked to carry into the days ahead. What you have lived through does not have to determine what comes next. The silence, the distance, the disappointment, and the uncertainty have all been real, but they do not automatically mean that the future will repeat the same pattern. The message asks you to look beyond the exhaustion of this moment and recognize that a turning point can begin before the evidence becomes obvious. You have spent a long time asking whether you should continue, whether your patience has mattered, and whether the person you care about will ever truly understand what you have given. The answer presented throughout this message is that your faithfulness has not been invisible. Every prayer, every moment of grace, every tear, and every decision to keep believing has been seen and has contributed to the person you are becoming. The message returns once again to the idea that you were not placed in this situation without purpose. The person who challenged your patience also became part of the process through which you discovered your own strength. What began as a relationship that seemed to be testing you eventually became a mirror, showing you fears you needed to face, wounds that needed healing, and qualities within you that could only emerge through difficulty. That is why you are being encouraged not to measure the entire story by what you can see today. The visible circumstances may still contain silence, uncertainty, and unanswered questions, but the message insists that unseen work can exist beneath those circumstances. Just as a seed can remain hidden while growth is taking place underneath the surface, the changes you have been waiting for may begin long before you can clearly identify them. The person you have been thinking about is also described as being in a process of change. The message does not suggest that everything will suddenly become perfect. Instead, it describes a gradual movement from guardedness toward expression, from distance toward connection, and from silence toward the ability to communicate what has been difficult to say. That change may first appear through small things. A different tone of voice, a message at an unexpected time, an honest conversation, or a gesture that would have been impossible before, may become the first evidence that something is different. You are being asked not to overlook those moments simply because they are not dramatic enough to match the size of your expectations. At the same time, the message reminds you that your own transformation matters just as much as the transformation you are hoping to see in someone else. You entered this season with one understanding of love, but you have come through it with another. You now understand patience not merely as an idea, but as something that has been tested in real circumstances. You have learned what it means to remain when there is no immediate reward for remaining. You have learned what it means to acknowledge fear without allowing fear to control your choices. And you have learned that faith does not always feel like certainty. Sometimes it looks like taking another step while admitting that you still do not know exactly what will happen. The message also returns to the loneliness you experienced. For a long time, you may have felt that nobody around you truly understood why you continued to care. Some may have seen your persistence as stubbornness, Guy, while you experienced it as something deeper. The message calls it faithfulness and says that this period of isolated endurance is not meant to last forever. Understanding and community are described as part of what comes next. People who have experienced similar struggles may eventually become part of your life, giving you the kind of understanding that does not require you to explain every detail. What you have learned through this season may also become something you can eventually offer to others who find themselves facing their own difficult relationships and uncertain seasons. The message then returns to the practical side of your life. It says that your needs matter too, not only your spiritual questions. The pressures surrounding your household, the resources you have needed, and the areas of life that have felt strained are all included in the picture of what is being addressed. According to the message, opportunities and provision may begin appearing in places where you previously saw only limitations. Doors that once seemed closed may become accessible. People who can help may enter your path, and resources that once felt beyond reach may begin moving closer. You are encouraged to recognize these developments when they appear, rather than automatically assuming that disappointment is the only possible outcome. But perhaps the most important promise is not about money, circumstances, or even the relationship itself. It is about peace. The message describes a peace that does not depend on everything around you becoming perfect before you are allowed to breathe again. You can experience peace while some questions remain unanswered. You can have faith while still admitting that something hurts. You can continue forward without pretending that you have no fear. The message presents this kind of peace as something deeper than temporary relief because it is rooted in the belief that you are not carrying the future alone. And that brings the message back to the relationship between you and God. The invitation is not simply to come when you are desperate. You are encouraged to speak with God during ordinary moments as well. While making plans, making decisions, beginning your day, ending your night, or simply sitting quietly with your thoughts. The message describes this as continuous closeness rather than emergency contact. It is a relationship woven into everyday life, not something activated only when circumstances become unbearable. The silence you once interpreted as distance is reframed as something that may have contained a deeper kind of presence than you recognized at the time. That perspective changes the way you look back at the hardest parts of your story. Instead of seeing every unanswered prayer as evidence that nobody was listening, you are being asked to consider that some answers may have been taking shape in ways you could not yet understand. Instead of assuming that nothing was happening, you are asked to recognize the possibility that some of the most important work was taking place beyond your immediate view. And now, after all the questions, the message arrives at its final reassurance. You are seen, you are heard, you are loved without qualification. Your worth is not determined by how perfectly you performed, how quickly your circumstances changed, or whether you managed to remain confident every single day. You are also reminded that doubt does not erase love. Fear does not automatically cancel faith. A difficult season does not mean you have failed. What matters is that you continue returning, continue seeking, and continue choosing what you believe is right, even when the path ahead is not completely visible. The relationship at the center of this message is still presented as something that may change. The walls may soften, communication may open, and the distance may gradually give way to something more honest. But the deeper transformation is already visible in you because you have become someone different through everything you have endured. The message asks you to look at that change as evidence that the season has already produced something meaningful. You may not yet have the complete outcome you hoped for, Sky, but you are no longer the person who entered the story. The patience, compassion, strength, and faith you developed are now part of you. So when fear tells you that nothing will ever change, Sky, remember that the past is not a perfect prediction of the future. When exhaustion tells you to abandon everything immediately, remember that exhaustion does not always provide the clearest perspective. Sky, and when silence makes you believe you have been forgotten, remember that silence and absence are not necessarily the same thing. The message does not ask you to pretend the journey was easy. Sky, it asks you to recognize that difficulty can exist alongside purpose, that uncertainty can exist alongside faith, and that waiting can exist alongside movement. You may not see every piece of the picture yet, Sky, but you are being encouraged to trust the process rather than demanding that the entire story be revealed at once. Your future, according to this message, is not something you need to enter alone. Sky, the God speaking through these words is presented as the one who remains with you through every step, every conversation, every quiet morning, and every difficult night. Sky, you are being told that what began in your life is not finished. And finally, the message leaves you with the simplest reassurance of all. You are going to be okay. More than okay, it says, Sky, what lies ahead can be good, real, and meaningful. You are encouraged to receive the good that comes without immediately expecting it to disappear. Sky, because disappointment may have trained you to doubt even the things you once prayed for. You were not forgotten during the waiting. You were not invisible during the silence, Sky, and you were not abandoned during the moments when you felt weakest. The message asks you to carry that truth forward, not as a guarantee that every detail will unfold exactly as imagined, Sky, but as an anchor for the journey ahead. The final invitation is to remain close to God, not only when you need an answer, but because closeness itself is what you are being offered. Sky, bring the ordinary parts of your life into that relationship. Let faith become part of your daily rhythm rather than something you reach for only during crisis. Sky, the story closes with the assurance that God is still holding what was started in your life and is not finished with you. The future remains ahead, the possibilities remain open, Sky, and the peace you have been searching for does not have to wait until every circumstance is resolved. You have carried the weight of this season for a long time, Sky. Now you are being asked to put some of that weight down. You do not have to know every detail of what comes next. You only need to take the next step with the understanding that you are seen, you are loved, Sky, and you are not walking alone. And as the message ends, it leaves one final thought. What is ahead is not merely more of what you have already experienced. A new season can begin, the atmosphere can change, relationships can soften, doors can open, and peace can return. You may not know exactly how or when every piece will fall into place, but you can move forward without believing that the story is already over. The message closes by affirming that the work has not been abandoned, the promises have not been forgotten, and the love being offered is not temporary. You are still being held, still being seen, Sky, and still being invited into a deeper relationship, built not only through the difficult moments, but through every ordinary day that comes after them. That is where the journey now stands. Not at the end, but at a point of transition. Whatever the next chapter brings, the message asks you to enter it with less fear, greater peace, and the confidence that you do not have to carry the future by yourself. Sky, God bless you.